So good afternoon. My name is Verletta Kern. I'm the head of the Open Scholarship Commons, and I'm excited to welcome you today to our space, the Open Scholarship Commons, which is really an interdisciplinary space designed for folks to explore best practices for creating and sharing research with wide audiences, making the impact of research visible to the world. So we're really excited today to host our Open Scholarship Commons Community Fellows workshops. These are workshops that have been designed and delivered, and will be delivered by graduate students who are underrepresented in the field of open scholarship. So our fellows have been selected for this program through a competitive process. They spent all of winter quarter working really hard on these fantastic workshops like the one you're going to see today, and working with mentors to refine those workshops. We did a dress rehearsal and refined a little bit more. And so really excited to have you here today to celebrate the culmination of this program. We're really proud of our fellows and everything they've accomplished. I want to take a brief moment as well to thank our co-sponsors for this program, the eScience Institute and the Diversity Seed Grant, who helped make these workshops possible. And after the workshops today, you'll see we have snacks here. So we'll encourage you to stay and continuing conversations about building sustainable digital projects with Paul and other folks that are attending today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to tell us about how to build sustainable digital projects.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Berletta. And thank you so much for the UW Libraries Open Scholarship Commons Community Fellowship and also the eScience Institute for helping us develop and giving us really useful feedback to improve these workshops. I'm just going to give this to you. I thank you so much for sending. Here are the materials that we will be using. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So welcome to this workshop called Building Sustainable Digital Projects. And what we'll be talking today is the following. First, I'll briefly talk about how can we think about digital sustainability and if there's even such a concept as digital and sustainability combined together. But more of our time will be dedicated on Collection Builder, which is an example of a tool that I will argue is a useful tool to argue about sustainability and think about sustainability when creating your digital projects. And hopefully we'll have more time for Q&A. But before that, I'm really, really interested to get to know each and one of you. But due to some time constraints, I'll be asking you to share your information if you're comfortable with it. If you go to this link, if you type in your browser, the link over there, the bit.ly/UWOSC-cb-share, you can put some information about you, like what is your name or affiliation and what brought you here or what made you interested to come to this workshop. And I'll be happy to look at it. You'll see that some people already shared the reason why they are interested for this workshop. And while you're doing that, I'm going to talk very little about me. So I'm a first-year PhD student at the Information School. Thank you. And before coming to UW, I've been teaching at the University of the Philippines School of Library and Information Studies, where most of my research work is on digital libraries, community archives. And while doing that, I was also working with some nonprofit organizations. And one of the usual or common themes when working with them is that these are organizations who are under-resourced. So there's a lot of questions about how are we going to fund this project? How are we going to maintain this project? So that is a constant question when I was working with these organizations, which brought me to this topic. How are we going to think about digital sustainability when working on our digital projects? So when I say digital projects, I'm pertaining to a lot of those are in the digital humanities project when you're creating, for example, digital exhibits or digital archives or libraries, or even like a blog where you're going to post some essays or some stories. And I stumbled upon this article in 2019 by Quinn Dombrowski, a well-known digital humanities scholar. And her article is called Sorry for All the Drupal. So let me read this portion in her article where she said, when you're building a Drupal site, it can feel like Legos. But in the medium term and beyond, it's a misleading analogy. Instead, building a Drupal site is like buying a pony. So the context here is that she has been teaching Drupal for a long time, and Drupal is an open source tool that you can use to build your own websites. And that's right, it can feel like Legos because you're choosing components to build your website. But then again, as time goes by, it becomes expensive and very difficult to maintain. So it's like buying a pony because it's fun at first. I don't know if some of you have bought a pony, but you get to like show your pony around. It's cute, but then it gets bigger. You have to take the pony to the vet. You have to feed the pony until the time that you think about how are you going to euthanize the pony. So it's not fun. In general, digital humanities projects have an average shelf life of 5 years before shelf life here is defined as the number of years before your project gets abandoned. Okay, so being abandoned can have some different meanings. It can be that your project is super stable, don't need to be updating, or it's completely abandoned. Like when you visit the website, it's error 404 or the site is not found, which is what's commonly happening with our digital projects. In a more recent study by Van de Kriep, they found out that the early DH websites from 1996 to 2003 were sustained by larger and more complex organizations with larger financial resources, have been and remain more likely to make this type of material available online, which is not surprising, right? Usually these are R1 institutions with National Endowment for the Humanities funding. So yeah, those are the organizations who can make these digital projects longer. But how about if you're a student, or how about if you're researcher, one researcher without any funding, right? So how are you going to go about it? Which leads us to thinking about sustainability. And I know there are so many definitions for sustainability, and sometimes this concept has been co-opted by capitalist and neoliberalist terms. Sustainability here is when we think about how are we going to do our project within our means, right? Like, for example, what it is that we want to sustain, doing the projects within our means, making the projects accessible and maintainable in as long as we intend to be, right? We're not depending on, let's say, third-party institutions where you don't know how long they're going to support your system and so on. One example of a framework that has been developed by the Visual Media Workshop at the University of Pittsburgh is a socio-technical sustainability roadmap. So if you'll have time later, this is actually like a 3-day workshop that they've conducted. If you go through these sections, you'll see that there are templates that you can work with to think about the sustainability of your project. And we're gonna do a version of it right now. This is a very shortened version. So I'm inviting everyone to join this survey. You can bring out your phones or using your laptops. If you go to slido.com and then type in that code 6535661, or if you scan that QR code, we're gonna do a very brief survey. I want you to think about a project that you've done before, or if you're planning to do a project in the near future, I'm gonna ask you several questions, and I want you to think about whether you have already thought about this, or whether you are like have some idea of how to find the answers for this, or you have completely figured this one out. Okay, so the first question is the cost of my domain name and website hosting, and for how long will this be maintained? So when you say domain name, that's like your website address, your own personal website address. If this is something that you have no idea what it's about, or if this is something that you know the answer to this, you'll just have to spend some time to look for it, or this is something you've completely figured out. Okay, and That's a good response. So this is something that you have some idea that it's really going to cost you, right? You need to make decisions for how many years you want to maintain this. How about this one? How much digital storage space, current and future, will I need for the project? How much digital space, current and future, will I need for this project? I have no idea what this is. I have some idea, or I have this one figured out. Okay, so most of you also know where to find the answer to this. And usually this can be like, are you gonna have your own server or are you gonna subscribe to cloud services, right? So again, there's a lot of decisions, again, that you have to make. How many years are we going to pay for this? And so on and so forth. Are the software tools used in the project open source or proprietary? Are the software tools used in the project open source or proprietary? I have some idea. So in general, it is more sustainable to use open source tools. Who will perform the software updates and patches if needed? And for how long? Is this project something that you can pass along to your IT department or IT person and then they'll take care of it? Or will you be maintaining it for as long as you can? Okay, good. I have some idea for where to find the answer to this. And then are the digital files in my collection follow any standards in terms of file formats? Are the digital files in my collection follow any standards in terms of file format? So this is suitable, especially if you're thinking of creating projects wherein you'll showcase some digital or digitized files. And it is asking you, do you know what file format you're going to use if you're going to make these digital materials available on? Oh, awesome. So for most of you, you have this one figured out. For the others, we are still working on it. Are the digital files in my collection follow any standards in terms of metadata? Now, metadata is a word that you're going to hear a lot during this workshop. So when I say metadata, we can think of it as how you describe your materials, right? So for example, who created this material? What is this material about? What do we call this material? And usually those descriptions follow certain standards. So do we have an idea what this is, or you know where to find the answer for this? Okay, awesome. And we have a couple more, so please bear with me. How will I preserve the analog or the digital material? So for every project that you do, whether you do like a digital exhibit or digitized exhibit, usually there's an accompanying analog material. So the question here is, are you also going to preserve that, or what are you going to do about it? Is this something that you have already thought about, or is this something that you've already figured out? So two more questions. Now, what will happen to the website or the digital collections or your digital project once the project is done? Once, for example, you no longer receive funding or the contract has already completed? I have no idea. I have some idea. Or you've already made a plan on what you're going to do with your digital project once it's done. Okay, I have no idea. I'm gonna give a concrete example later of what happened to some of our projects when it ended. Okay, awesome. So those are some of the few, I would say, major questions when you go through the socio-technical sustainability roadmap from the University of Pittsburgh. I've already included the links in the material if you want to go and delve more into it. It has more templates that can help you plan for the sustainability of your digital project. Now we're going to move on to the second part of the workshop, and we're going to use an actual tool that, for me, I'll argue is like a good example to think about sustainability in your projects. And this is called Collection Builder. And I'm going to give some introduction to it. So Collection Builder is an open source framework developed by the digital librarians at the University of Idaho Library. And this is part of the methodology that they call live static methodology. So the idea is they're using these static site generators to build their digital projects, digital collections. So if this is the first time you're hearing about static site generators, so in general, right, we have two kinds of websites. The static websites that originated in the 90s, the early websites, right? And the dynamic websites that we usually use now, wherein you submit an information and then a page will be generated for you, right? Like all the websites we have now, like Facebook and all the social media websites. But this is a rethinking of modern websites using static web technology. And as you can see here, it's a provocation to rethink how we do digital infrastructure in libraries to recenter our technology choices around sustainable, pragmatic, and minimal approaches. And there's a block of text here, but I'm only going to read the second part, why they developed this. And I hope this resonates with you. We spent extensive effort setting up heavy database-driven platforms and found ourselves giving up control over our data, being locked into proprietary contracts and excluded from development decisions. Our time was consumed with maintaining complex system overhead rather than collaborating with researchers, creating data, and providing high quality access to users. So this is a frustration that they've experienced. As librarians, they feel that they're really not in control of the data. These are the materials we'll be using. And so they developed Collection Builder, and you'll see later, they've developed these lots of digital projects that made them more in control of these decisions over their data and the look and feel of their product, and many more. So some examples that I've had from my previous students and also some projects that I've worked with are the following. So this website is called Aswang sa Aklatan, which literally means monsters in the library, that was developed by my former students. The context here is that in our country, in the Philippines, our government released a memo wherein they instruct the libraries to give up the leftist materials. And so a group of academics scanned and digitized these leftist materials and put it on a Google Drive. But then again, a Google Drive is not that accessible. It's really difficult to look for things that you don't know exist. So my students created this library on top of that Google Drive, wherein you can browse the collection. There's a total of 163 items digitized, and there are subject headings which now allow you to look at what's in there and so on and so forth. So you'll see there are some description of what this is about, who's the creator, what this material is, and if you click on it, then you'll get to read the material. It's like a digital library, but really it's from a Google Drive. And then another group of students developed this website, which is for cat adoption. So during the pandemic, there's an explosion of cats in our campus. And so this group of students working with an organization took photos of the cats, and then they put it here so that they can be up for adoption. So if you look at some photos, they're the ones who took this photo, and there's this one's already adopted. If they're not yet adopted, there's an adoption form, which links to a Google form that people can go to, right? So this is like a totally different use of the collection builder, but it still works, right? And you can see they also have this map feature wherein you can see where the cats are within the campus, where they usually are. And of course, it's not only for small organizations. The University of Idaho, which again is the ones who developed it, have been using it for their bigger collections. This is one example of a project that they did, the Idaho Queer, which is an oral history of the queer people in Idaho. And what is really fascinating about this project is that all of these interviews are hosted on YouTube, and you can play them here. And then also you can visualize their transcripts here. So you'll see there's a visualization of the transcripts and with the subject annotation. And all of this made possible with just spreadsheets and minimal technology. And of course, we also have an example from UW, which is from our very own Erica Bailey from the UW Tacoma Libraries, which is an oral history of Tacoma Japanese language schools. And this one has a combination of different materials. You'll see that there are images, transcripts, videos, and photographs. So you can showcase different types of digital materials. So those are some of the few examples, and I hope that gets you excited of what we're going to do this afternoon. So this is just to show you that Collection Builder is now gaining popularity, especially in North America. But of course, there's still a lot of people out there who may benefit from using this minimal tech infrastructure. As for example, in our country, we're now like really exploring this one because we found it really useful for us. It is not the solution to everything. There's definitely some pros and cons. Pros is that it's minimal tech infrastructure, open source. And if you don't have a domain or host yet, you can use GitHub to host your project for free. But it's not suitable for large collections, especially if you have like thousands of items. It's not going to be practical to put all of those information in just a spreadsheet. And there will be some skills required. Customization is doable, but it'll require some web development skills. But for me, I think this is something that has a lower barrier of entry. When I say web development skills, this is about being familiar with HTML, CSS, and knowing how to change the look of your project if you're familiar with that. So I would say that has a lower barrier of entry, but still it requires some learning curve. Okay, so before we do the workshop, these are some prerequisites. You need to have a GitHub account. So if you don't have a GitHub account yet, this is the best time to do it. You need to create a free account. It will take like 2 to 5 minutes. But take note that you are not required to use GitHub for this project. Okay, you can still do the whole project on your local computer. This is just for us to try the collection builder. Then you'll need some digital items for the exhibition. I've provided you with some links that you can use. There's the sample objects from the UW digital collection. So if you don't have one with you, I recommend that you use that link. So if you go to that link, you'll see some photographs, a PDF, and some description of that items. And then finally, you'll need to have access to a software that will allow you to create CSV or comma separated values file. And for this workshop, it's going to be Google Sheets. Okay, is everyone ready? All right. So the whole process is divided into 3 steps. The first step is we're going to set up your website right now. We're going to make it right now. And then the second step is the long part, because this is where you're really going to spend most of your time describing your materials, providing high quality description to your materials. And then finally, we want our project to look and feel appropriate depending on the theme of your project, right? We don't want it to look all the same. So we're going to do some personalization. I'm going to demonstrate some personalization. So all of the steps are provided in the material that I've given you. And I'm going to show it real quick. I want your attention here so that you'll see the whole process. It is really quick, but then you can also try it on your own. So the first step is to set up your website. And for me to do that, I need to go to the link, the homepage of the collection builder. And what we'll be using is the GitHub Pages template. So in here, there's a link that says make your own. And when I click on it, it redirected me to the GitHub repository. So you can think of GitHub as, for now, if this is the first time you're seeing GitHub, you can think of it as a Google Drive where the codes are saved. So what we're seeing here are the actual source code of that project, right? And because I'm logged in, I can see my profile there. There's a button in here that says use this template. And then I'm clicking create a new repository. So when I click on it, it's gonna ask me some questions. The most important one is the repository name. So in here, it's asking me, what is the name of your project? Or what's gonna be the name of this folder, of this repository? So I'm gonna use UW digital exhibits. And then notice that there's a green check mark below it. That means that that name is valid. And then this name is going to be part of the URL or the website of your project. So make sure that this name is something that is like, in a way, formal and recognizable. There's also a description that's optional. And we're not gonna touch all the others. We're just gonna put a repository name. So when I click on create repository, it is now, what's happening here is that I'm copying the codes from collection builder repository, and it is saving it in my GitHub repository. So this is my homepage. I've now copied their codes. And then what I need to do is to activate my website. So I can do that by going to the settings tab. So you will see that there's in the rightmost tab, it's called settings. If you click there, and then I'm looking for the pages panel on the left side. And then in here where it says branch, I'm gonna change none to main. And then I'm gonna save it. And that's the whole process, right? So just to recap, I went to the collection builder repository. I've copied their codes and saved it to my GitHub repository. And then I went to the settings and activated my website by going to the pages here, pages, and then selected main for the branch. It is me telling GitHub, hey, look at this folder where it says main. That's where my project codes are located. So once I clicked on save, I need to refresh the website, and I will know that it is finished. It's doing some background process. There we go. So I know that it's done because it's telling me that my website is live at this URL. This is now gonna be your website. This is the URL for your project. And then you'll notice there is a button here that says visit site. So if I click on there, it will show me this template, which is our project. And right now it is populated with some demo materials. If you look at the browse, there are some items in there, which we're gonna modify. So at this point, you should have like a project website, but all of them looks the same, okay? So I'm gonna give you some time to try it on your own. And then I'm gonna walk around, especially if you have some specific questions. So there was a question earlier, the option to activate the page is not available. And the reason for that is we're using a free GitHub account, so your repository has to be public. And that's like a caveat, right? Especially if your project is like a private one. But there are so many other options to work around that. It's just that for this workshop, all the projects that you'll be creating will be public. And when I say public, that means it's accessible over the internet, all the codes that you have, and also your actual project. Any more questions so far? So good? Okay, there is an optional step that you will see in here, which I also highly recommend that you do. If you go here, there's an optional adding the website link on the about section of your code repository. So you will notice like this is your project website, right? This is the public facing website. So we can call this the front end of your project, but the back end are your codes. That is your GitHub repository. And we'll be working mostly here. So if you work here, you're going to go back and forth to your project and to your back end. So it's recommended that you also click on the settings here and then tick use GitHub Pages website. And then you'll notice that your project website will be put in there, and then click Save Changes, so that you'll have a shortcut or link to your project saved in there. Okay, awesome. Now I'm gonna go to the next portion, which is, again, this is going to be like the main work, right? Or you'll not be able to finish this in one sitting. And this is going to be a continuous work where you maintain your collection. This is providing metadata and objects to your project. So this is also divided into 3 steps. The first is creating the metadata and uploading it into your data folder. The second is uploading your files, your actual digital materials, to the location called objects folder. And then finally, we're going to update some settings on our project. So again, I'm going to demonstrate it, but because this is like a really long part, you can also follow along if you want. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a metadata and upload it to data folder. I provided a link in there from our materials for the something. So if you go to that link, it is going to ask you to copy a document. So I'm going to make a copy. And what's going to happen is that depending on the account that is logged in, it's going to create a Google Sheets into your Google Drive account. Then you will see that there are some columns and a sample row that you can model. Now, these are what we call the metadata fields, or these are the facets or descriptions of your materials. You will see that it's going to ask for, let's say, object ID, file name, title, creator, date, etc. What these fields are about would be described here in the documentation that is also linked in your materials. And it can be intimidating at first, but you'll notice that you don't have to answer all of those columns. You'll see that there's only a few of those that is really required, right? So for example, object ID is a required field. So this is a unique identifier for your items. File name is another required field, and so on. So let me try and answer this using the collection, sample collection that we have. I have it here as well. So for example, we have the computer lab at Suzzalo. And then I've also provided some links where they came from. which I should open here. Okay, so you can use these materials for now, or again, if you brought your own, that's also going to be great. But if you want to use these materials, because I've obtained them from the UW Digital Collections, you can also look at their descriptions here. Okay, so let's say this is the material that I have, right? And then I'm going to describe that material using this template. So for the first one, I'm gonna just call it call 001. That's gonna be like a unique identifier that I assign for this material. It doesn't have to be call, it can be up to you as long as it's a unique identifier. And then for the file name, I know that the file name here is computer lab sizzlo.png. So I have to put the complete file name, including the extension. For the YouTube ID and Vimeo ID, I'm gonna skip it because this is not a YouTube ID or Vimeo. And then for the title, let me just delete all of these. We're lucky that this material is already described, right? So we're just copying the description. But if you're gonna work with your own materials, and this is something that you need to like grapple with, right? And sometimes materials doesn't necessarily have a title, right? Especially in photographs. So you may want to provide your own title. An example is busy computer lab and reference desk inside of Suzzalo library. And then creator, this field is not a required field. And sometimes we don't know who the creator is, especially for this photograph. We don't know who the photographer was. But there is a field here that says, this one's super small, that says contributor, but this is different. So we're not gonna put it. So what's happening here is that I am describing my material, but then I'm following some certain practices based on my field because I'm in the library and archives field. We have a lot of convention. But if you're coming from, let's say, biology or museum studies, you're gonna have your own practices of describing your materials. So you're gonna see some other ways of describing or practices that you're following in your respective fields. There's another one that I want to show that I think is really interesting. Latitude and longitude. This one's also not required, but the benefit of putting the values here is that it will be visualized in your project. And this is something that is really easy to do. So if you go to any map application, for now, we'll just go to Google Maps. And if you look for a location where you want that material to be mapped or associated with, you'll just have to right click on that material, right? So for example, University of Washington, if I right click on it, or let's look for the Suzzalo library. There we go. If I right click here, it will give me the latitude and longitude at the topmost part. So I right click, and then if I click on that information, it will be copied to my clipboard. So once I've done that, I can now paste it here and make sure that I'm pasting the first number in the latitude and then the second number in the longitude. So as you can see, there are other fields in there that you need to fill in. Again, this will depend on whether you want to use those fields or not. And what's good about Collection Builder is that if you leave it blank, it will not be shown, but also you can completely change whatever those fields are. And that, I mean, Google Collection Builder allows that. So I've also provided like a finished product for you because I know that part will not be able to really finish that. So if you go to this link that I provided, you will see that after some time that you worked on your metadata, it can look like this, right? So we have some file names, and then we have some description. But notice here on the example that instead of the file name, I've used some links. And Collection Builder also allows you to do that. Like if you have some materials that are already online, and then you want to use those materials, you can just put the links in there, but there's a lot of caveat to that. Okay, you have to make sure that the link that you provided is what we call the static links. You'll know that is static link if you look at the link and it usually ends with the file format in there. Usually these are not the case for Instagram or Facebook or any social media materials that you have. So if you're looking for hosting services, UW has like a server space that you can also use for free. I think it's available to all students for 1 gig and staff. So, but there are also other services that you need to explore. But then again, it will require planning and costs. Okay. So, as I mentioned, that's really the long part of the workshop. So if you've already completed or if you try to do that, what you need to do is to download this metadata. And then we need to download it as a comma separated values or CSV. Now, once you downloaded it, this is something that Google does. You will see that the file name is really, really long. So I highly recommend that you rename your file. This is an example. When I downloaded it, it's saved on my computer as this very long file name. So what you need to do is to rename this file into something shorter. What I recommend is, for example, use my dash metadata. And then finally, we're going to upload that file into our repository. So going back to our project homepage, to your GitHub accounts, we are looking for the data folder. And then inside that data folder, there's a button on the right side that says add file, and then upload files. What we're doing here is we're going to upload our metadata into our project. So I will see the file in there. And then to make the changes, I need to click on commit changes. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes.
I just kind of experimented.
Yeah.
For the YouTube one, I noticed like I put the YouTube ID and then I don't have to say the name of the file.
That is correct.
But then if I go all the way to the right hand side, can I skip format?
Oh, that's a good
I just
question.
tried.
Format in this is a required field. So that's okay. It will still work, but the downside is you will notice that in your project, format is the small icon that will show you this part, right? The image, the transcript, and it also plays a crucial role in the home page where it says objects here.
Should I do like video slash YouTube?
Video slash MP4. I know it's not like the correct answer, right? But the reason why they have that is so that you'll have like a good summary here at the beginning. Oh, okay. So this collection has these images, audios, and videos.
And if I've downloaded the CSV, like if I want to make a change to my CSV, then I make the change directly to that downloaded CSV, or should I go back to like
The
Google Sheet?
It is highly recommended that you use Google Sheets because for some reason, Microsoft Excel is destroying the CSV files. Or if you have like a text editor, that's also like recommended. So for example, when I'm doing the actual projects, I'm using Visual Studio Code to modify the CSV files. And then you can also modify your CSV files on the GitHub page. So that those are also some recommended, as long as you don't use Microsoft Excel. So that's the answer. Okay. So yeah, the format will not really destroy your file. So for example, if you have a video file and then in the format you stated images slash PNG, it will still work, but what's gonna happen is that there's gonna be a mismatch in the count, but it's not gonna like destroy your file. Okay, so the next part here is we're gonna upload the actual object. So at this point, we've developed our metadata, we've uploaded it in our data folder. The second step is to upload our actual materials, right? So to do that, we can use, again, if you have your own materials, then you can upload it. But here I'm gonna use these sample materials that I've already downloaded, and then I'm gonna go to my objects folder. So if I scroll down, I'm looking for the folder that says objects. And then here, I'm gonna click upload file. So it's the similar process. We're uploading files on our repository. I'm choosing my files. It is here. And then I'm uploading some of them except the sources. So again, you will see that they will be uploaded. Make sure to commit the changes that will finish the uploading process. Okay, so at this point, you've added the metadata, you've added your objects, but if you go to your website, it still looks the same thing. Nothing has changed. We haven't modified the template yet. So this last part is some bit of actual coding. So you're really gonna do some coding. We need to go to the config YAML file. So I'm on the home page of my repository. I'm scrolling down. I'm looking for a file that says config.yaml or underscore config YAML. This file. If I click on it, I will see that it's a bunch of codes, a bunch of lines, and we're going to do some editing. There's an edit button here on the upper right corner. If I click on it, I'm looking for a line that says metadata or collection settings. So in the steps, it should be line 37. So you will see there's an instruction wherein you need to change the demo metadata, which is like the demonstration, into the name of the file that you uploaded. So this is the reason why it is highly recommended that when you downloaded your CSV file, you change it into smaller, file name so that it's easier to do this part. You don't need to put the .csv file extension. You'll just have to put the actual name. So sometimes when there are spaces, it can also like mess up the project. So it's recommended that you name your files without spaces, which is like the best practice anyways. So once you've done that, you need to commit the changes. And you've noticed that in GitHub, whenever you make changes, it is asking you to commit the changes. And sometimes this will come up because GitHub is not just like a repository. It is actually a control versioning system wherein it tracks all the changes that you do. So a best practice is to describe what changes you did, but you can also skip that part. But for this scenario, I can say, I updated the metadata settings and then click commit changes. So when you do that, you can now go back to your homepage, to your code repository homepage, and you will see that there is a brown button here that says pending. It's your indicator that GitHub is still working at the background. What I need to do, because at this point, there's going to be some changes on my project. So I need to wait for this to finish. You will know that it's finished when you see a green check. And sometimes it can take a while, but usually it can take like 2 to 5 minutes, depending on the amount of changes that you have done. So there we go. So now I can see that there's a checkbox. It's a success. Can it also be an X? If there are so many changes that you've done and you mess up the code, it can be like a cross mark. But in this case, we successfully applied the changes. And then if I go to my website, if I look at the browse, okay, it should be there. I think I messed this up. So you should see that you should have your items, right? But in what happened here is that I'm not seeing any items. What do I need to do? I need to review my steps. And the first thing that I'll do is the recent change that I did, right? So I'm going back to my config.yaml. And then I'm gonna check, did I spell that correctly? Did I put my metadata? That looks correct, right? My dash metadata. And so I need to look at my data folder and see if I've uploaded my file, which is there. But there we go. So accidentally, I've renamed my file my metadata. So I made a mistake. So this just to show you that those things happen, and that is like easily traceable based on like what changes you did. This is me like debugging what happened. So if that's the case, then I need to go back and edit my config YAML. It's not metadata, but it's metadata, which is unpronounceable. So here I can see corrected file spelling. Okay, but for some of you, if you tried it, were you able to see the sample materials? Yeah, yeah. So I know it can be like some learning curve, but then as you see, these are some of the tools that have low barriers, right? A Google Sheet, GitHub, not really. Yeah.
So I noticed like I was trying to make my own things and I had like three things,
Uh-huh.
images, and a YouTube video.
Uh-huh.
But like I forgot, like initially it said there are 13
Oh yeah.
and I forgot to erase the other things.
Yep.
So then when I like brought my spreadsheet in, I noticed like in my now site, like there are the three things I brought in, but then I noticed I have like instead I had 13 things.
Yes.
Like, I thought I only had three. And then I went back to my spreadsheet and realized, oh, I forgot to erase like the file.
The other object IDs. Yes, that happens because the template provides this list of object ID, and each object ID translates to like an item in your collection. So that's why it will assume that you have those materials, but you haven't populated them yet. So you see they're completely blanks, right? So that is just to show that it will still work, but it's empty. So this should work. As you can see, I found it. No, that's like a sample, but it should be here. There we go. Okay. Ooh, okay. So as you can see, those are the sample metadata. Then you can also look at the timeline. In here, you'll notice that there are dates, and then there are also not date values. Again, this will depend on what values you provide, but this is to show that it will still work, but this is something that maybe we're not like intend to do, right? Because we assume that it will be displayed accordingly, but because we provided text instead of just years, then that's why they're at the latter part, but it still works. So this will prompt you some questions. How are you going to put values in your metadata? Any questions so far? Okay, so that is the second part. And as I mentioned again, that's really like a long part, right? Because that's where you work on your collection, you provide description. But at this point, we also want to make our projects look personal, right? We don't, this is the wedding of my mom and dad 30 years ago. So we want to personalize our project. We don't want it to all look the same. So there are many options to do that. And because you've already tried changing the settings, a lot of the personalization is just like that. So that's actual coding. You're basically programmers at this point. So if I go to GitHub, the first thing that I want to do is to change the website title and the description. I can do that by going to my YAML file again. So I'm looking for that same file, the config.yaml. And then in the part where it says website settings or site settings, those are the things that I need to edit. So I'm going to click edit. And then I'm going to change the title. So let's say UW digital collections. You can also change the tagline. This is like a short phrase that will appear on your website. So usually just a very short phrase. Celebrating history and tradition. And then if you want a longer description of what your project is, then there's a description part in here. You can also put your name in the author section. This will not appear on the actual website, but this is a background information about your project. So those are the few things I'm modifying here. But as you see, there are other things in there that we're not gonna cover for now. So I've changed those lines, and then I'm gonna click on commit changes and then commit changes. But then again, best practice is to describe what changes you get. And I'm gonna go ahead and make more personalizations. because we'll need to wait for those effects to finish. This time I'm going inside the data folder, and then I'm looking for the themes. I went inside the data folder, and I'm looking for the theme.yaml file. So here, what I want to do is to change the featured image on my website. Again, that will really change at least the look of your website. So I'm clicking edit. And then on line number 11, where it says featured image, you can put one of the object IDs in your collection, or you can also put like a link to an image that you just want as a background image for your banner. So this doesn't need to be part of your collection, but usually in some of the projects that's using Collection Builder, they want to showcase like one of their collection items. So in here, let me use, for example, the aerial view of the campus. So I am copying the object ID here. But if you know the object ID, you can just go ahead and edit it. I copied that, and then I'm pasting it here. I'm deleting the demo item, and then I'm pasting it here. Collection 003. Then I'm going to click commit changes, and then click commit changes. Okay, so I hope that in that very short 30 minutes, you get a rough idea of how to do this project using Collection Builder. I know there are some learning curve involved, like for example, getting familiar with GitHub, but we're using GitHub like as a tool for this work, but again, it's not required to use Collection Builder. But it is also an option, especially if you're just a student who doesn't have funds to spend for domain name and domain hosting. So once it's finished, you should see the changes that took effect in your project. Right. Okay, any questions so far? Do you see this as something like, okay, maybe I can try it, or So there's a lot more things that you can do that is unfortunately not covered in this workshop, but I'm serious with this. If you're thinking about using Collection Builder with your projects, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you. You'll just need to buy me coffee, and that's it. Okay, so now I want to show something. Going back to the concept of sustainability, I've also put in links in the slides if you want to explore more personalization. For example, you want to edit the about page, or you want to completely change the colors and the text. Those are easily doable, but I'm giving you the links for you to explore. But then again, I'd be happy to help you out. And if you want to share, if you've done something and you want to share it, please do so. But I want to go back to the idea of sustainability, like what happens to your project after it's finished, right? And I have an example that happened to me personally. This is in 2021 when I worked with a friend of mine who works for the Commission of Human Rights in the Philippines. So their task is to develop these materials, digital materials that they use to educate our people in our local language to tell them about their rights. Because at the time during the pandemic, there are some police arrests and then people don't know what their rights are. So they develop these videos, these learning materials, these posters, and they want a digital archive where they can put all those materials together and showcase it. And then we're really having a hard time because they don't have funding. The funding is the person. The resource is the person working for that project. So we tried some other bunch of open source out there like Collective Access, Omeka, but then we all have these questions. How are we going to host this? Who's going to maintain it? And then we stumbled upon Collection Builder, and within like a span of 2 days, we were able to translate our project from that to this. And she was able to present her project, and it was accepted. But then again, she moved on to a new role, and then no one in the commission maintained the project, so it's no longer accessible. However, because Collection Builder is purely built on static website, meaning these are pages that you can actually download and save in your hard drive or in your USB. It is also easily archivable. And by that, I mean web archives from the Internet Archive. So all of these, all the projects that we did still resides in the Internet Archives, which is this huge archive in San Francisco, which is in a way more sustainable because they're still here and they've been around for 20 years. So in a sense, we have an idea that this will still be accessible. If you go to this link in the Internet Archives, you can still browse the actual materials that they develop, and it still resides in here. So, and I say that this is like a good argument to use static-based websites because everything that you see in there, I mean, that's it. There's no underlying database behind another server that is inaccessible, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea or a good introduction about Collection Builder. I am sharing my information here. I'm serious about that. If you're thinking about using it for your projects, please reach out to me. And then there are other templates that was created by Collection Builder. So there's a fast one called Google Sheets template wherein you want to prototype your projects. The one that I'm using personally is the CSV template because it allows you to do more comprehensive personalization, and it's not dependent on GitHub. So for example, you want to you have your own server. It's literally copy pasting your website from your local computer to that server. So you don't need like other like complicated tools, just really uploading your files in that server. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please let me know.